Ladies and gentlemen, this is an article that came out in the Atlanta Black Star, February 19th, 2018. Black incarceration rates are dropping while white rates rises. But what's really behind the surprising trend? Criminal justice observers are making note of a trend in incarceration that goes against conventional wisdom and deserves attention. The rates of black incarceration has dropped while white and Latino rates of imprisonment are on the increase. The Sentencing Project reported that in the first decade of the 21st century, while the U.S. prison population increased overall, a shift that was taking place specifically, a significantly lower growth rate between 1972 and 2010, America witnessed a 500% increase in its jail and prison population, with state prison experiencing a 12% annual increase during their highest growth years in the 1980s. However, between 2000 and 2010, prison growth cooled down substantially as state prison population rose an average of 1.1% each year, and federal prisons 3.3% on average, compared to a rise of 5.6% and 8.6%, respectively, in the 1990s. Look more closely at the dynamics behind the numbers. The Sentencing Project report noted that as prison population stabilized and decreased in some states, that changing dynamics were reflected in racial and gender disparities in incarcerations from 2000 to 2009. Overall, the incarceration rate in state and federal prisons dropped by 9.8% for black men and 30.7% for black women. By contrast, the incarceration rate increased 8.5% for white men and 47.1% for white women, declined 2.2% for Latino men, and rose 23.3% for Latino women. So, prison is actually rising for white and Latino women, and it's decreasing for black women. So, there you go. For women, the shift in the racial gap was uh, dramatic. The number of white women in prison increased 48.4%. That's pretty high. The number of black women fell 24.6%. And the number of Latino women increased 75%. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, I think Latino women are now being heavily targeted. There must be a reason for that. Seriously. 75% for Latino women. Yeah, they're now look like among the women, they are the prime target. Black women were imprisoned at a rate 6 times higher than white women in 2000. By the end of the decade, that disparity had narrowed by more than half to a ratio of 2.8 to 1. Despite the substantial change, the disparities by race and ethnicity remained, as African Americans and Latinos constituted more than 60% of imprisoned offenders. African American males were incarcerated in state and federal prisons at 6.4 times the rate of non Hispanic white males. And it should not be that way. When you look at that FBI table, there is no way that white men and women should be the biggest population in prison. It's just that when they go before a white judge, despite the fact that they committed a felony, they get off of the hook. And that's what's been happening all along. They are committing a lot of felonies up in here. But they got this system so rigged up, they don't go to jail. They made sure no one went to jail more than the black man. That's what they did up in these courtrooms. And the disparities are still there. But see, now that the drug epidemic is going on and so many of the white males can't find work like they used to, they're now committing crimes. And wait until I get to the part of the reasons why they're claiming their incarceration rates are high. It's going to sound very familiar to the black community. Okay, let's get back to this. Hispanic males at 2.4 times the rate of non Hispanic whites, according to the Sentencing Project. Similarly, data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics found that black male incarceration fell 22% between 2000 and 2014, while the white rate increased 4%, closing the gap by a quarter. During that time period, imprisonment among black women decreased 47%. That's very significant for black women. And the rate among white women soared 56%, narrowing the racial disparity between black and white women by 2/3. I was reading an article that I did a video on last year. It said that black women are leaving prison. And as fast as black women are leaving prison, it's filling up with white women. It's very intriguing. Mark Maurer, executive director of the Sentencing Project, told Atlanta Black Star of the shift incarceration rate by race. I'm sorry, by race. The first part of it is there are two different stories. I don't know. It's law enforcement saying we're arresting too many black people. No, trust me, your law enforcement ain't saying that shit at all. Okay? They don't give a damn about arresting us or killing us. No, no. That would mean they would have a conscience, and we know they don't. Among whites and Latinos, to some extent, the common assumption is opioid related. I think that's a good chunk of it. I don't think that explains the whole thing, Maurer added. The trend started around 2000 before the opioid plague. So it was starting in that direction. It may be more related to the underlying changes in white working class communities. Now, listen to these reasons, y'all. It's going to sound very familiar. Declining economic opportunity. Haven't the black community been saying that all along? We've been saying that shit for centuries. Physical disabilities, job related, and others. So the white community is now using a lot of the reasons that the black community once gave, but we were told when we gave those same excuses, we were told we were just inherently violent. But it's amazing how they're using the same exact reasons for our disparities, the white community is now using those reasons. I guess they're just inherently violent. Some of that winds up in opioid addiction, risk factors for bad health and crime. I think it's declining opportunities that lead to entry into the criminal justice system, he added. We've been saying that all along. We've been saying that all along in the Black community. It was the lack of opportunity, and we were going through the crack epidemic, which drove up the crime. But oh, you didn't want to hear that. But it's amazing now that they are going through this opioid plague in the white community. You see, they're using the same exact reason that the Black community have been saying for a long, long, long time. Assessing the incarceration numbers for African Americans, Maurer surmises the shift impact of crack cocaine arrests are at play. Damn right about that. Along with declining crime rates over the past 20 years. Haven't we been saying that? Crime has been on a decline in the Black community. Actually, it's more like 27 years. Crime has been on a decline. It's not soaring in the Black community. It's just that that's what the white media puts out, that, oh, everything is just falling apart in the Black community. The crime. Ladies and gentlemen, the crime has been going down in the Black community for quite some time now. Damn near going on 3 decades. It's been going down steadily. It has not been going up. And this right here proves that these white folks are over exaggerating how bad things are in the Black community. They're doing it. Their media's doing it. Trump and his administration, they're all in on it. You got to understand, they have lied to this entire world and told them that they are superior. They're not superior. The only thing they can do is make themselves appear superior, but they are actually not superior at all. We all know this. But as you can see, in these last days of their 6,000-year reign, the truth is now coming out. And it also explains why the cops interact with the Black community as they do. We are not committing that many crimes. That's why when they approach us, they have to escalate a situation in order to arrest us. They're antagonizing the whole goddamn thing. And we have seen this over and over and over. They're so desperate to keep this stigma of us being the worst people in America. They're willing to send their cops out, make sure they escalate things with Black people, but with white people, they de-escalate everything. Just to make it appear that you are the worst thing here in America. And it's simply not true. It's not true. So now let me get back into this article. So crime in the Black community has been steadily declining over 20 years. We'll go with what it says in this article, but actually it's been longer than that, y'all. Maurer also pointed to increasing evidence that community-based initiatives played a role for Black communities, while more whites were introduced to widespread poverty through the aftermath of the Great Recession. So what he's saying is, after the recession, this is back during the time of George W. Bush, the white community never fully bounced back from the 2008 recession. Actually, it was even before then, 2007, 2008. Many of you remember this because, Bush had to do all that bailing out and all that bullshit. And that just right there, more evidence that, you got very poor people leading this country. More evidence of it right there. Okay. Black people always knew tough times, which is the damn truth. We have lived through tough times for centuries. And more white people are experiencing it, along with deteriorating life prospects. That's why they're committing suicide. And as Brookings' study found, increased mortality rates, drugs and alcohol abuse, and suicides from 1998 to 2013. And right now, and it's always been this way, ladies and gentlemen, it's always been this way. White males, all throughout the history of this country, have always been the biggest ones committing suicide. Precisely when these shifting incarceration rates were taking place. One part I find interesting is we had the fiscal crisis of 2008 and 2009, and they usually hit communities of color more. But this wasn't the case. How we understand why that didn't take place, my guess is that in many respects, poverty and disadvantage is not a news item in the African American community. That's right. We always knew and been around poor black people. Okay, all of us, some of us have them in our families. Many of us do. We have people of all income levels and even in our families. So, no, that's not news to us. It's been going on for decades. But for whites who were dependent on coal mine jobs and auto plants, those jobs are gone, Maurer said. In the black community, there is more of a tradition of social safety net, of support with churches, neighborhoods helping each other, social service agencies, he added, noting that in some white communities, some of those network dynamics may not have been as strong, hence their downward trajectory. I don't agree with that. I mean, the church really don't do that much for the community. I kind of partially agree. I don't fully agree with what he was saying. Jawan Z. Bennett, 4-year PhD student in criminal justice at Temple University, elaborated on the role of community based organizations in the decline of the African American incarceration. The young criminal justice scholar pointed to the work of people such as NYU sociologist Patrick Sharkey, yeah, who cites the unsung presence of community groups as a missing piece in a puzzle where a combination of factors is at play. Sharkey estimated in his research that for 10 additional community based organizations in a city of 100,000 people, the murder rate dropped 9% and violent crime fell 6%, as criminologists were not really sure what causes the drop, Bennett told Atlanta Black Star. With Sharkey's research, it's a combination of things. Nonprofits didn't even see them doing criminal, just reform work, Bennett explained, noting that these are just ordinary citizens as opposed to experts that society often turns to for answers. It makes sense from a practical point that if you live in the community, you know how to solve the problem. Bennett cited The organization Cease Fire, in which those who have perpetuated violence in their own community become violent interrupters. I'm sorry, interrupters. So, they're trying to explain it, but I don't all the way agree with them. But let me go on. Bennett also noted that in the 1970s, with the influx of black men into the prison system, sociologist Robert Martinson released studies claiming nothing works, including rehabilitation and treatment, bolstering advocates of a tough on drugs stance with more punishment. Now people have adopted evidence based programs, and that adds to what community based organizations do, Bennett said. People are starting to understand that violence is a public health problem. I'm pausing because they're now saying this because of the opioid plague that's going on in the country. When our people were being mass incarcerated, they didn't call violent crimes in the hood a public health problem. But now that lots of white people are going to jail for crimes and they are heavily on drugs, now violent crimes is a public health problem. And look at the bigger picture. They're saying this stuff again to keep their people out of jail. People are starting to understand that violence is a public health problem. It sure wasn't a public health problem during the crack epidemic. Again, these people are going to do and say whatever they have to do to keep their people out of jail. Issues such as crime are a public health problem. So now crime's a public health problem. If that's the case, why are all these people still sitting in jail doing your cheap labor? These people are a freaking trip. However, the racial injustices and disparities remain, and the Temple scholar believes conditions will not change in America without a paradigm shift in policies and a healthy conversation about race. We don't need no more conversation about race. I don't agree with that. I don't want. I don't want no more babbling about race, and then the end result is nothing changes. The hell with that. We don't need that anymore. That's played out. The numbers are still horrendous by any reasonable measure. We can't overlook any of that, Mark Maurer of the Sentencing Project concluded. Nonetheless, the fact that the African American numbers are going down, both in absolute terms and black white disparities, offer hope. These problems are not intractable. How racial disparities develop in the justice system are subject to policy and practice decisions in the justice system. Yeah, well, that started back during the black codes and slave codes that y'all still practice today, and you think we don't know. How racial disparities develop in the criminal justice system are subject to policy and practice decision in the justice system, he added. Maurer used the example of New York State, which has been a leader of decarceration and has 25% reduction in its prison population. So up in New York, they're saying that everything is now reducing as far as the prison population, almost entirely due to a reduction in drug sentences. Well, you shouldn't have been doing that to people in the first place. That just go to show your evil nature, throwing all these people in jail for marijuana and all that bogus shit. No, you did that because you're evil. With Black and Latinos benefiting the most. It's like the converse of what the drug war looked like. Blacks and Latinos were 90% of the people incarcerated. Now 90% of the people who benefited. Whether it was motivated by concerns of racial justice, that is certainly in the effect. We can make changes if we are focused on it, but there is no adverse effect on public safety. No, you incarcerated all these people on some bogus charges, and not to mention your crooked cops were planting a lot of drugs, especially on black men. Many of us have heard these stories for decades in the black community, and we've seen the evidence in videos. Remember the one in Maryland? You know, this is the stuff they do to get you in jail. Again, pay attention to this stuff. If the black community was really the most violent, then why do they have to plant so much shit on black people, weapons and drugs? That right there should tell you these people are lying, and they've been lying all along. They've been lying their asses off all along about that. You don't have to plant drugs on somebody that's inherently violent. So you're full of shit. The fact that those things go on in America all over this country tells you right there these people are lying. We were never no most violent. Their asses are lying. And really, when you look at the FBI table, no one in this bitch should be in prison more than white people. No one. Please tell me what you think, ladies and gentlemen. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell twice, and join me on Black Junction TV and blackspot.com. And this is nothing but the Most High righting a wrong. White men and women are now going to jail in much larger numbers, and black men and women, we are decreasing in the population. A wrong is now being turned around. And see, they don't know why it's happening, but we know why. Peace, family.